Hey friend, I am so excited to paint a Yosemite landscape with you today. I am working with these Winsor Newton watercolors, and I've got Venetian Red, Yellow Ochre, Perylene Green, Prussian Blue, Payne's Gray, Burnt Umber, and VanDyke Brown. We will be working with all of these colors today, but feel free to use whatever you have on hand. I've also got my Princeton brushes. I've got my size 2, size 4, and size 16 round brush. And that's about it for my supplies. I've got my cold press watercolor paper, of course, paper towel for blotting, and my water jar. And just so you know the size I'm working with today, I've got a 5x7-inch watercolor paper. And without further ado, let's get to painting. Just to get a light sketch going, we are going to just about 1.5 inches down towards the right. We're going to do a light outline of El Capitan, and it's about a 2-inch across horizontal line that we're working with here. And then for the top, it's going to just be slightly rounded, just a bit. And then I'm going to do a vertical line that kind of goes slightly inward and then fans out a bit towards the left. Next up, I want to just sketch a little bit of a silhouette here that's towards the right, just a horizontal line. This is going to be where we're going to put some of our trees. I'm just using a really light wash color of burnt umber just to sketch these, so that way it'll just mesh and blend really nicely as we build the painting. From here, I'm going to do a little bit of a gap, almost like it's a horizontal rectangle here. I'm just going to do a swooping line here. This is going to be our meadow. And then next, I'm going to kind of do a curved line slightly upward here. And then I'm going to bring it back down towards the left. Okay. And last but not least, I'm just going to do a line over here connecting right to this point. So that way I have a silhouette outline of our meadow that we'll be working with. And this just helps just to get the foundation layout of the actual painting. Alrighty, so next, what I want to do is, before I forget, I actually have a little part of the mountain here that I want to include that's way off in the distance. And it's just going to be a slight angled line fanning towards the left. We're going to have mostly trees covering it, but just to have a little bit of that foundation laid out just to guide our painting is going to be super helpful. Okay, so next up, I want to utilize my size 16 brush, and I'm just going to do a wash of water all in the sky. And for the sky, we are going to be working with Prussian Blue. And keep in mind, if your lines are still pretty wet, maybe just allow for 1 to 2 minutes those to dry before you add the water next to them. So that way we don't get any brown bleeds into our sky. Okay, so next I'm just going to take some Prussian Blue, and just in a few areas I'm going to apply this blue. And I am leaving some white gaps because I want that to mimic the clouds overhead. So I am leaving some intentional negative space. Just going to smooth out some of these harsher areas of blue and just kind of buff them out a bit. And then I'm just going to bring this pale blue wash just all the way down until it hits this line here. Okay, and now I'm just gonna let our sky hang out here. And then once we come back, we will start working on our El Capitan. Our sky is just about dry. And to start with this El Capitan background, I'm gonna mix a very small amount of Payne's Gray with a little bit of burnt umber to form a little bit of a cooler taupe. The Payne's Gray is going to take down the yellow a little bit from the burnt umber. And I am now just going to apply a wash of color here. And we want some variegation with the granite, but we definitely want to get a nice cool tone wash as the pop of highlights that we'll have behind all of the details that we're going to overlap with to give the granite a nice rocky texture. Okay, so while this is still wet, I'm going to take a little bit of VanDyke Brown and some burnt umber together, mix it, and add just a touch of Payne's Gray. Okay, so while this is still wet, I just want to apply a few streaks and areas of shading that I'm going to have bleed out. And if your color is leaning too dark, you can always apply some more water to that color, so that way it'll just soften the value of the color. Okay, so I'm letting some of the highlights pop. I also want to just take my brush here and just buff out the sketch line a little bit, so that way it'll bleed out nicely. So I'm just taking a few areas that I really want to pop with some dimension and contrast of light and dark. I'm not really overworking the paper at all. I'm just allowing it to kind of bleed out. Okay, so for here, I am just gonna let this hang out. We'll add some more wet into dry details in a bit. But while that sets and dries, I am going to now start our water down below. So I'm just gonna take my brush here and do a nice wash of water. And this is the Merced River in Yosemite National Park. And in the summertime, it is so refreshing to just swim in it, in safe areas, of course. There's lots of water, especially if there was a good snow season. It will be super full. Okay, so I'm going to take some Prussian Blue here, and I'm just going to apply it in a few areas, kind of in a chunky way here, just to start. Then I'm going to grab some Payne's Gray and just apply it kind of around the borders and the left and right corner. Okay, so from here, this looks a little funky. So we're gonna actually use our size 4 brush from here on out with the water. And using a wet size 4 round brush, I'm just going to guide the water, leaving this white area just like so as a pop of a highlight, and just adding some horizontal streaks back and forth using my brush. And I'm just going to add some more depth by reapplying some more Prussian Blue and Payne's Gray, especially along the edges of the water and the shoreline. And again, carrying that horizontal left and right motion as I get more inward in the body of water. So now that I've got my body of water completed, I'm just gonna let that dry. And while it dries, I am going to work on the finer details of El Capitan. So I'm doing a blend of the burnt umber, VanDyke Brown, and a touch of Payne's Gray. And I kind of want this color to be slightly warmer than the previous one we did for the wash previously. So I'm gonna add just a hair more of the burnt umber. Okay. So now I'm going to apply some streaks of this color. And it may seem a little bit too dark when you first apply it, but you can actually blot your brush a little bit and take a dry brush next and kind of pull from that pigment that we just previously laid and add this nice texture using the belly of the brush here. So not the tip, but the horizontal kind of 45-degree angle belly of the brush, and do this up and down motion. And this is going to give the rock a really beautiful texture and a really nice variegation throughout. I'm gonna have some pops of more heavily shaded areas for sure, but overall you definitely want this nice kind of dry brush texture using the belly of the brush. So here I've got a nice concentrated area of shading. Maybe the shadows here in the rock are just creating this nice depth. So I'll let that be. And then I'm going to go from the top over towards the right here and apply more of that horizontal up and down motion. Maybe this area here has some nice shading, so I'm gonna add a nice area of the color here, and then slightly drag and buff it out towards the bottom. Then towards the top, maybe just adding a few small little brush strokes using just the tip of the brush here. Okay, so before we finish off, I want to add just a few angled horizontal lines here. So I'm just doing some angled, slightly horizontal lines just to give a little bit of variegation in the face of El Capitan, so that way it's not all just structurally just vertical rock with no variegation within it. So I'm just adding just a few bits of detail, some angled horizontal lines, not a ton, but just a few, and kind of dragging out some of the paint downward after I apply those lines. And that's just gonna make it look a little bit more realistic. And again, I'm just gonna buff it out slightly. Okay, so there is our El Capitan. I am now going to move on towards adding some of our granite color here off towards the left. And I'm just gonna do a really simple wash here. It's not gonna be super detailed since it's more in the background. I'm gonna add just a touch of Payne's Gray to this color, just to tone down some of the warmness of the burnt umber. Okay. So next I'm going to take some VanDyke Brown. So that's our deepest brown right over here. And I'm gonna go along the shoreline and just kind of outline it with this color here. And I wanna make sure the shoreline has some irregular jaggedness to it. I don't want it to be perfectly smooth because that's not what it's like in nature. So I'm just adding some irregular brushwork along those edges. Next, I'm gonna take just a little bit of burnt umber and I'm just gonna apply that with some water. Just about going all the way up to the base of El Capitan, just like so. And just to tone it down a little bit, I'm gonna add a little bit of the Payne's Gray to this wash here while it's still wet, just to take some of that yellow out. And I'm giving it a little bit of texture with my paintbrush just by dabbing it slightly. And I'm gonna give it a little bit of a irregular texture too at the base, just by using the tip of my brush here. Okay, so next I would like to lay out some fall colored trees. So I'm basically gonna be working with yellow ochre and Venetian red. Feel free to use whatever orange, yellow, or red shades you have on hand. And I'm gonna start with my Venetian red, which is one of my favorite colors ever. I love fall colors so much. So what I wanna do is apply a good bold saturation of Venetian red, and I'm just using the tip of my brush to create kind of an irregular cone shape all the way to the base of the burnt umber. And I'm gonna leave some really nice texture all around. Next, I may want to apply a bigger tree here with some Venetian red. Making sure it's very irregular, just like it is in nature. All right, next I maybe want just one more Venetian Red color tree off towards the left here. Maybe it's slightly cut off. I am going over the line of the burnt umber just a hair bit. All right, our next fall tree here is going to be yellow ochre, another favorite of mine. And I maybe want to apply a yellow ochre tree just off towards the right of this Venetian red one. Maybe I'll apply one over here in this lighter area of Capitan. And I'm just going to use pressure with my brush at the tip here just to kind of buff out the harsh line of the burnt umber below. Then maybe I'll do just a couple shorter yellow ochre trees over here. All right, next I'm just gonna let these dry and then we will apply our pine trees just above there. Okay, next up I'm going to use my size 2 round Princeton brush and I'm gonna use Perylene Green, which is this nice deep kind of rustic green. And I am going to add some pine trees just kind of tucked behind all of the colorful fall trees. So I'm going to go ahead and start right behind this tree here. I like to lay out my trunk just by doing a straight line. Keep in mind, it may be good to just have a few pops of this green kind of pop from behind the tree in those gaps there. And I just like to add a few textured brush strokes on either side of the trunk here, making the very top the thinnest point and gradually increasing the width to kind of follow the silhouette of a cone shape. I go into a lot of depth on how to paint a pine tree in my Watercolor North Cascades Misty Pine landscape tutorial. So if you haven't checked that out, that's a great resource when it comes to how to paint pine trees. I also want to have one that's kind of just tucked behind this red tree here. So we're only seeing like the top third of it. I just start with a straight line and then just do some texture, really light pressure with my hand to keep it nice and delicate. And then I'm going to have just a few pops of this green, just kind of tucked into the Venetian red tree there. And I'm just going to go ahead and carry this process all the way across the page, just tucked behind and around the fall trees. And I do want to play with some of the height variety as well. So have some that are slightly smaller, some that are quite tall, and just playing with the variegation between the height and the brush strokes on the left and right side of the trunk lines. Sometimes to help me kind of get the layout of the composition with the trees, I will actually lay out the trunk lines ahead of time, just so I can kind of get a feel for the layout. So I'm gonna go ahead and do just a few trunk lines here just to get my layout ready to roll. And here's gonna be the layout of my pine trees. So from here on out, I'm kind of just following that kind of cone shape where the top of the trees are very narrow, and I gradually increase the width, making sure to tuck in just a few dots of the Perylene Green amongst the fall trees. Not a ton, but just a subtleness to it, so that way you can really get the idea that they're tucked behind the tree. And I'm using very light pressure with my hand as I work my way across. I'm just gonna take some VanDyke Brown, and I'm just gonna add a little bit more texture to the shoreline here. I'm just using my size 2 brush and using it horizontally at an angle just to get a nice variegated texture on the meadow here. Because it's fall, it's not quite green anymore. All right, next I'm going to take a little bit of my VanDyke Brown, and I'm going to mix it with some Prussian Blue. And I just want to add a little bit of shading here below some of the trees. And once I apply that color, I'm going to blot my brush and just smooth it out and kind of drag it downward slightly. This is going to give the trees some nice shading and dimension. Next, using the tip of my brush with the same color, I'm just going to paint a few really delicate, dainty branches in our fall trees. And I basically just want to do light pressure with my hand and do kind of like this V letter shape in the trees just a bit, kind of irregular. Again, I'm not doing a ton, but just to show that this foliage here is all connected. Just keeping consistent with these delicate, thin little dash lines. Just kind of deeply shading this area a bit more here. And last thing I want to do is paint a few birds in the sky. So I'm going to just use a blend of Payne's Gray and VanDyke Brown just to form more of like a black color. And I'm going to use super delicate, really light pressure with my hand, and I'm going to apply them to the left of El Cap. And I'm just gonna paint these really dainty little, like kind of squatted flat V shapes. And I may just do 2 or 3, kind of space them out slightly. Okay. I'm just gonna go ahead and peel off the tape. It is one of my favorite parts, not gonna lie. It's very satisfying. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my watercolor half dome Yosemite National Park winter landscape. It'd be so cute to kind of gift this duo set of a painting to someone that you know that loves Yosemite. Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any further tutorials.